Well, this is a pleasure, Luis, to have you here with us. It's the first time that we have you with us in these Metaphor webinars. And as you can see, there is a lot of appetite for whatever you have to tell us and to engage with us in a conversation. So looking forward for your webinar.
Thank you so very much.
The normal way I was telling you, the normal way we do this is like a presentation, 45 minutes around, and then 45 minutes conversation. But you are completely free to engage with us as you prefer. If you want to invite questions all the way through, just let us know. You can manage, you can lead it in the way that you would prefer. Okay.
Thank you so very much. So probably to get into the room, I was surprised that it was this week and not next week. So I stressed a bit
That was
about
our mistake. There was a glip in the ticket tailor that it says from the 3rd to the 10th of June.
ah,
And it was a glip that I think it was Ben Good who maybe
the,
noticed Sam Scott, but I managed to communicate with everyone and clarify it, and most of the people who register us are here, if not everyone. So
no, absolutely wonderful because it reduces the time where you think, oh, what do I do? Because initially I wanted to present a book project that I'm doing at the moment. However, as we know from all projects, they, at any given point in time, they take twice as long as you estimated. So not ready yet. However, I thought I seized the opportunity to build on something that started earlier this year, or to be precise, end of last year, which is going to the agenda for the cyber systemic community of the IFSR for 2026. And this is where I start my presentation. So, can you see
um,
the presentation now?
yes, we can. Yes.
So, elements of a reflexive turn. What do we do when we do what we do? I'd like to give you a bit of context where this comes from. And as I already mentioned, recognizing and realizing the field of systems research in itself and for itself, the 2026 agenda for the cyber systemic community was last year's essay, where since 5 years now, the IFSR, or the executive committee of the IFSR, sourced by the conversations that we have with our member organizations, came up with setting a theme for the current year and to look into the cyber systemic community. After years where we went to collaboration, integration, and the lot, sensing something that very much in the Hegelian term felt like a field that learns about itself and starts to recognize itself as a field, not just a collective of individuals or parts, but starts to sense itself as a whole. We had a first presentation of that at the Systems Thinking and System Practice conference in Hull to invite towards that agenda and towards that confluence or that convening of the different cyber systemic associations, societies, companies even, to in their collaboration and by reaching out to each other, growing a shared understanding of what it actually means to be in that field, to do systems research, and rather to compete, to collaborate, and by doing so, allowing the field to move, to develop further. We published the paper in Systems Research and Behavioral Science. It's open access. You can find it there. You go to the Wiley website, you can download it for free and go a bit deeper into it. I cut it short now as what are the different fields we were looking into or the different themes we identified as crystallizing points in in the community. But I'd like to go to two major findings or major points that came out of that research, that co-authoring of the paper. And the first thing is a success paradox. Systems language is spreading faster than its understanding, achieving wide adoption but not conceptual integration. We see an entire generation, I call them generation systems change, which embarked on the language, which are all fascinating and enthusiastic about leverage points and emergence and all that comes with it. Yet using the language in a rather romanticized way and not going to adopting or the the experiences, the theories, the books, the writing, the papers, the academic endeavor it grew from. And there is, well, we call it a success paradox, but there is a gap. How do we invite this generation back into or connect to the body of experience, the body of knowledge, the body of understanding we as a cybersystemic field are sitting with? And the second finding that we identified in the agenda work was what we called a reflexivity gap. The field has become highly skilled at analyzing other systems. This is what system scientists and cyberneticians and so on do, yet only partially institutionalize the same second order scrutiny towards itself. And does not mean to say, oh, we're looking now through the lens of this method or that method, but to really think about institutionalizing, finding regulatory mechanisms to have the field being in contact with itself, and by doing so, being able to regulate its own further development. So this is very much where we arrived in Hull. And what I'd like to do today is to go a bit further, go a bit deeper, starting with a bit of a philosophical twist. Along the question, how does a field or a social ecosystem understand itself? It's a very basic question on the one hand, but it always comes with the depth of questions that address what is reality or what is truth, what is real, and how do we qualify that? What is good and what is ethical? And we see immediately, especially when we go to organizational studies, organizational development, leadership studies, this is very crucial to the different ways of looking at the organization, looking at people in the organization, looking at different ways of leadership. So what is good and what is ethical in the activities of the organization and in leadership as such. And last but not least, very much a philosophical question as well, is what can we do? And connected to that question, also the question, what is our sense of agency? Are we floating in that broad river and go with that very flow? Do we try to row against the tide, or what can we do in these contexts if we say, or if we want to get closer to reality or the truth, or if we say, oh, it's not as good as we want it to be, or it's not as ethical what we see in the conduct as we hope for. So we're back to the question, how does a field or a social ecosystem understands itself? So what is it for real, and is it good or not? And what can we do in that context? I'll start with two perspectives, and this is very much where we come into the space of the metaphorum, looking at identity and closure. What constitutes the identity of a field, and what provides its closure? How can it distinguish what's in the field and what is not? So this gentleman you all know. Um, and there's one key term that we encounter over and over when we ask this question. There's a question of purpose. What's the purpose of the field? And well, we know that at that moment we are kind of stranded with a very ontological perspective that says the purpose of the system is to do what it does. There's a lot of truth in it. Yet, what kind of agency does that inform? And is that actually good, or can it be better? So this is where we start. But what's more interesting is, well, you all know the viable system model, but the interesting part really is the system 3, 4, 5, which distinguishes different perspectives and facilitates closure. With the system 3, control for that matter, concerned with the here and now. So what is? Answer the question, what is? While the system 4, or uh, at times labeled in intelligence, is looking outwards and looking forwards. So what is it there and then? So what is and what could be? And in terms of the regulating mechanisms of the viable system model, System 5 is facilitating, regulating that balance between the here and now and the then and there, in terms of resources, in terms of attention, in terms of regulating it. What criteria we are looking at in terms of facilitating and closing these two concerns of a viable system. And back to the initial question, back to how does a field recognize itself or understands itself? So what is the field? What could be? And how do we, in that range of opportunities or possibilities or openings in the horizon, we come to decide for the one or the other. So we need a regulating system 5 that gives us a criteria to find the balance between the two. We could go much, much further and deeper, and I'm sure many of you would have a lot to say about that. But I'd like to move on to another uh, great system scientist who very much um, guided me on my way. Me living in Berlin, coming from Germany, being able to read Luhmann in the original. That is another perspective that informed my perspective on system sciences and cybernetics for that matter. And here, in contrast to what we saw in terms of purpose earlier, Luhmann focuses very much on meaning. For him, um, autopoietic systems, and he brings it in with the organisms, psyches, social systems, are meaning processing systems. And meaning he characterizes or defines as the unity of the distinction of actuality and possibility. And that's one of the typical Lumanian terms where we look at it and say, the unity of a distinction and what could he possibly understand by that, or what does he mean with this kind of meaning? And what he is referring to, and this is a sort of a link between the two, between Stafford Beer and Nicholas Luhmann, that they are both going to George Spencer Brown and to borrow the laws of form and use that as a possibility to process a distinction theory, which is very much starting from the very beginning of system sciences. There's a system and there's environment. So I need to draw a distinction, just on the one side saying, oh, that's the system, and on the other side, that's the environment. Or in our case here, this is the field or the cytosystemic field, and this is on the outside. So moving forwards from the laws of form, just to borrow the language, we can go back to Luhmann and his unity of the distinction between actuality and possibility as being meaning in that transcription. So we have actuality, which is not possibility, but together they, labeled in Luhmannian terms, provide meaning. Or in another perspective, more a philosophical perspective, they create the world. In the world, something is or could be. And the unity of the two elements create what we perceive as being the world. In a similar way, we could look at the viable system model and system 3, 4, 5 as saying system 5 is the unity of the distinction between system 3 and system 4. And at that moment, you see how the two map onto each other, how Luhmann's meaning maps onto system 3, 4, 5. The actuality, the here and now, the possibility, the then and there, and a system 5, meaning, provides the closure of the two, or the unity, constitutes the unity of the two, which is very much something that for the last 30 years informed my thinking about organizations, social ecosystems, and how we process foremost, not roles, not relationships, but questions which need to be asked in organizations, in social systems, in social ecosystems to recognize the system in its as it as itself, in itself and for itself, in the identity to say, I am the field, or I am this organization, or I'm that social ecosystem, and an environment that is on the other side, and a future that is open and a resource that can be actualized. I like to move from the first question about identity and closure. So what is the system? What constitutes its identity, the purpose, the meaning, to the observing. And this is where one of my great teachers, Raoul Fischer, comes in with a slight a slight distinction from the very ontological perspective that Luhmann and Beer share, to go into a more constructivist perspective. So ontology versus epistemology. What is what is creating the system? Is there a system, a material thing to be revealed, or is it our very way of observation that creates, that realizes that very system? And I like to illustrate that with the distinction between reading and writing. If I can read an organization, I can also write it. If I'm able to understand it, I can also intervene and know what possible implications that intervention may entail. We know with all the complexity in the world that any kind of intervention theory has an element of wild guessing. But here it is more about the fundamental and basic possibility to do that, and not just looking into the world, and especially with Luhmann, who was said to be an intervention pessimist, to say, well, things do what they do, systems do what they do, and we can only observe them and acknowledge that they do what they do. But here we are more in a gesture that includes the observer, that includes the system itself and its practice to observe itself. We are back to the socio-systemic community and the field it constitutes. How is that field observing itself? So it, it occurs on both sides of the observation. And we are very much uh, landing on the question that some of you certainly know from Ray Eisen. What do we do when we do what we do? But this is not where it started. It very much started with two other gentlemen. Of one, Umberto Maturana, is, is are paving the way for second order cybernetics. Any explanation of what we do must include an account of how we are doing the explaining, or whatever we do when we observe needs to be scrutinized, needs to be acknowledged, needs to be taken into account, that if we observe in a certain way, we could do different practices of observation, and we would see different fields. This is the point where I would love to go back to Scott's laws of observation. And Bernard, now that you're there, I just reduce it to the three, and probably later on you come with the other two. But it stuck with me, and um, I share it wherever I can, to say that for any given observation, there's always more detail, there's always a bigger picture, and there's always an alternative perspective. And especially the alternative perspective, another way to look at what we want to look at, changes the very thing we are trying to observe. We are the gardener and the garden, but that is something that comes later. And we are here with Heinz von Förster as the other gentleman that I promised, um, towards towards enlightening us what we are in for if we say, oh, we observe a field, observing observations, being sensitive to the implications of the different way to look in terms of what we account as being real or as being true, and all the implications that come with it. I think this is where we leave the old white man behind, and I have a few more people to introduce. No more old white men. I would love to embark on a term that is not widespread, systemic hermeneutics. But for me, it is very much a summary or something there where we land after moving from Stefford Beer to Niklas Luhmann to Umberto Maturana and Heinz von Förster and visiting Joe Spencer Brown on the way, is the observation and probably the entire practice of systems and cybernetics is profoundly hermeneutic. We have a rich tradition in system science, and critical system thinking especially, to lean into pragmatism as sort of the nearby philosophical tradition. However, I would argue that as much as that is helpful in the case by case observation and the question what to do next, we start always in the hermeneutics with that very gesture. And here comes the first lady that I wanted to invite on my slides, and the hermeneutic enabler, which gives a very, very beautiful account to what we just saw about purpose and meaning and observation, cybernetics, second order, to really understand that all this theory, all these models are hermeneutic enablers. They help us to approach the world. There are mirrors in which we can recognize experiences, in which we can recognize blind spots, in which we can recognize pathologies, where we say, oh, this is not going to work according to the model. And we have the possibility to inform our understanding with these models like resonant mirrors. I like the participatory, meaning-oriented, and emancipatory stance angle you're coming with here, and the sensitivity of, well, self-transforming methodology, the sensitivity for how our understanding of a social system informs and forms its further unfolding, its further evolution. And that is something not to underestimate. If we look at the world in a specific way and understand the world and ourselves in it, right? Our sense of reality, our sense of agency in a specific way, that very much shapes what becomes possible from here. And not only what becomes possible, but also ways with a propensity, what out of the different possibilities will be actualized, will be realized in the next step. We were leaning so far into the question, what is real, what is true, what holds the system together, how do we observe, what do we do when we do what we do? But we haven't touched on the question of value. We haven't quite touched on the question of what is good and what is ethical. And I'd like to introduce a term here, and people who heard me presenting here or there are very much aware that there are two terms, that inform, and recognize and realize, which I use to address a certain thickness of what's already in the world. And I'd like to call up here Karen Barad. And probably you're familiar with her works on meeting the universe halfway. She's a quantum physicist who moved into the space of social uh, sciences, and she not just mapping quantum physics on social systems, but very much came with the the addressing of that thickness of onto epistemology. We've seen in the system sciences the one or the other moving towards that direction, but more in the sense of practice informs theory and theory informs practice, and very much like a hermeneutic circle. While for Karen Barad, onto epistemology is more a thick continuum of world that is that has always an ontic quality, which is informed by the very reflexivity that we encounter in the world. And it can be agents, but an asteroid crashing into a planet is also an element of reflexivity in which the asteroid recognizes the end of its journey and starts to become something different, and the planet sort of shrugs and well reshape and found its surface reshaped. It's a very limping example. But what I want to stress here is that it becomes very, very difficult to keep up the distinction of ontology on the one side and epistemology on the other side. Together, they create a reality, and not a reality that we construct as we would say with a constructivist, but rather something, and we are back to the other slide, something that we recognize and realize that by growing an understanding of something like a social system, like a field, like a company, we realize it in the double meaning of the word. We recognize something and we make it real. The moment that we realize, we bring something into the real, and and as such, it starts to inform and form everything else. What's interesting with Karen Barad is that in being such a vocal proponent for onto epistemology as a continuum, she still sees the or feels the urge to add the ethical to the onto epistemology. And this is where I'd like to put a question mark, whether that is at all possible, or what kind of agency are we addressing if we think that is possible? Or is that rather an ethical onto epistemology as, as a totality, something that we can recognize and realize? Recognize and realize the quality of a social ecosystem, of a viable system, an organization, or whatever we choose to put our attention to. And this is where, last but not least, I'd like to call up a good colleague of mine, Karima Kadawi, who I had the privilege to work together with in the last 7 years in the metamorphic transformation of the Moroccan education system. And this is where, going back to the ethical onto epistemology, recognizing and realizing the field, we, in that recognition and realization, also recognize and realize its quality in terms of rather Tomanian stance, as we recognize the beauty as the coherence, the resonance, and the lucidity that we meet in a specific um, systemic constellation, which would be on the flip side of anything that we would address as a pathology, where we say, oh, that is incoherent, it's incomplete, it is rather stiff, it does not resonate, and it's not clear at all. So looking or realizing and recognizing the beauty. And in the Arabic language, they know the term of Husn, which is the gaze that beautifies. Looking at something to evoke the beauty, to recognize and realize the beauty that there is. And the other part, and I've written a paper on that, is love as the quiddity of existence. Well, that is very, very deep philosophical stance and worth another webinar, if not another year-long discourse on what could possibly be meant by the quiddity of existence. I'd like to leave that field and call up a last term where I'd like to land, which is regenerative hermeneutics. And this is moving very much into, or relaxing into, the question, what can we do? We go back to Tom Keane, they're describing what they are doing as a hermeneutic process, a process that is experience-based, relationship-oriented, co-created, co-facilitated, a process of inquiry, learning and understanding, embedded in epistemic humility, trusting our human potential, trusting our humanity, realizing the essentiality and existentiality of love. We're still in a practice that very much feels like Sufi induced, but is very much capturing the different aspects that inevitably come with a process of inquiry, learning, and understanding. If we, even as far as we would say, oh, in systems research, we would immediately recognize a process that describes itself as experience-based, relationship-oriented, co-created, co-facilitated, based on inquiry, learning, and understanding, embedded in epistemic humility. And we would cut here and say, this is very much what we could allow to characterize what we do when we do systems research. But then trusting our human potential, trusting our humanity, realizing the essentiality and existentiality of love brings in a quality that we saw earlier with Karen Barat, sort of the as if something is added to the process. But when we go back to the very meaning or the very understanding or the very essence of that ethical onto epistemology, we come to realize that whatever kind of process of inquiry, learning, and understanding we're pursuing, it comes with acuity, it comes with a taste, it comes with a color, it comes with a melody. And as much as we invite ourselves in second order cybernetics to observe our observations, very much in a cognitive sense, this is an invitation to look at more, acknowledge more, recognize more than just a cognitive act of inquiry, learning, and understanding. I land here as sort of, yes, this is sort of something that feels kind of far out and some almost deeply spiritual. However, we recognize there is something to it that we may want to explore a bit further, that we may want to invite as an additional dimension into our academic flatlands. But what I'd like to end with is really answering the question, what can we do? We can grow a shared understanding from co-reflected lived experiences. This is very much hermeneutic phenomenology, but something that we, in this very field of systems and cybernetics, are not doing often enough. We're debating on ideas and theories and models and instruments, but we rarely get real. We rarely move towards co-reflecting what is it actually that we do when we do what we do. And out of that could grow a much deeper understanding of what kind of field emerges when we're looking at the field of the cyber systemic community. And on that one, I like to end and invite a vivid conversation thereafter. And imagine we were sitting like these people here in the desert around the fire, sharing lived experiences and co-reflecting what allows us to grow a shared understanding of what is and what could grow from it. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Luis. Very, very, very beautiful and interesting and exciting conversation and proposal. Thank you very much. Okay, we have already some people lots of people applauding and sending lots of love and hearts, good hearts. So really, really, really exciting. We have Ben wanting to start the conversation. Ben.
Well, I'd like to give. Is there anybody else with a hand up first?
No, it's
Or
all
is it
right.
just okay? Oh, all right, all right, all right. Then I
Don't
feel okay
forget
about
to
it.
switch off your camera. We are all envy of the Florida and the sea.
Right. I'll
No,
face the
I'm
house.
joking. I'm
So,
joking.
so I think I have a perspective I can add a little value here. Coming as a bit of an outsider to the systems world, and then I'm really in that liminal space in between two worlds of the literal construction community that I hope to bring systems thinking and practice to. But I also want to bring the construction world to systems thinking because I think it's a target-rich environment for research and a lot of problem situations to solve. So the what I hope to achieve here, at least in the States, is to create a liminal space, a nonprofit for that purpose. Because it's like the Kantian collision of the reciprocal action, right? And some of what Dr. Klein was talking about. So you have theory and practice already circulating, but then to bring the actual community that practice is oriented towards. So, for example, bringing people who build models and people who build buildings, and I know that's what we do in our practice, but with that intention of that reflecting on it. For example, when every time I learn a new systems concept, and there's another part of my mind where I'm already having to translate it to somebody that's never heard of systems thinking. So, for Ashby's law, requisite variety, I go, okay, Murphy's law, that's what I'll present. And so I think it's given me having to be ready to translate. So it's when we're in a community where we're all using the same words, like Dr. Klein was talking about, it can turn into a language game. And so liminal space, and maybe it already exists. Maybe that place already exists. That's not that it's like an empty space for the people that are in the system, and then for the people that are trying to change the system. That's enough out of me for now, but at least get the conversation going. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. Luis, you want to engage with Ben?
Just embrace. Just embrace. I think it invites us again. And as you keep stressing, Ben, coming from the construction world, what is the construction world, and what does the construction world know about itself, and how does it relate to itself in the different dimensions that we're talking about, and to what extent is it is it caged in, especially in the commercial aspect of it, in all kinds of metrics, and to what extent does that allow for a language to float freely, and that is probably one of the saddest things that we see not only in that field but in many fields, that if we invite growing shared understanding from reflected lived experiences, yes, there is the element of getting real, but also the sheer necessity to make space and take time. And we see that on the altar of efficiency, all these spaces are slaughtered, squeezed out of organizations or whatever kind of practices. We do not have the habit anymore to take the time to reflect, to learn from our lived experiences. Well, we try to follow the protocol and hope that that will do the trick. I'll leave it
That's right. Yeah, I have a lot I can say to that, but I don't want to monopolize, so I'd like to give everyone else a chance.
Thank you, Ben. And thank you, Luis. We have Stephen Harwood.
Microphone and camera on so you can see me.
Yeah, we
Thank
can
you,
see you.
Louis. I really enjoyed that talk, and yeah, the paper, I found that a really interesting and useful paper that you produced with your co-authors. So thank you for that paper. The talk you've just given was really quite thought-inspiring and raised a variety of issues. It draws me to a particular experience I've got at the moment. I'm a Department of Systems Engineering and we teach systems thinking, but when I actually think about how systems engineers teach systems thinking and how I teach systems thinking, I suddenly discovered in an exam situation that I've actually got a serious problem because we talk different languages, although we use the same words, but it does raise the issue of meaning. And I do like you referring back to the distinction between Luhmann's and Raoul Spejo's distinction in terms of what constitutes a system, because I think that's a fundamental issue. Raoul has always been a very good mentor to me, and with it drew attention to that fundamental distinction. But the Checklin paper, 1985, is quite clear about this ontological epistemological distinction, which is really nice in terms of how to put it. The way I would describe systems thinking within the hard context of systems engineer is thinking about systems being an ontological reality which engineers design out of necessity. Whereas if we start looking at it from a constructivist perspective, then we can start thinking about systems thinking, where systems are nothing more than a epistemological device that helps us in the process of inquiry, and that inquiry, I suggest, is one where we're actually trying to do something in the world. Back to what you were actually talking about, what do we do? And this gets me back to the domain that I'm spending quite a bit of time in, is how do we handle the complexity of situations? And with it, we look at the complexity in terms of these conceptual systems, which don't really exist, but we need to have these as epistemological devices to be able to make sense of the reality we engage in. And from this, then we can use these epistemological devices to start thinking about the actions that we actually engage in, which leads into a completely new world. The one issue that I did find really interesting was your discussion about meaning. And I looked at the word performativity, evaluated the concept, and found there's at least 7 or 8 different ways. Andrew Pickering talks about cybernetics being performative. But if I think about performativity, then I really like the notion of Judith Butler's use of performativity with regard to what it's like to be queer, and with looking at identity construction and the performativity of being queer in that particular sense, which is interesting because it does get to this issue of meaning. And I'm going to draw upon a phrase that you use. You came out with the phrase social ecosystem, and I cringed. And I always ask the question, why is it that we systems people, or anyone for that matter, we've got a systems language, why is it we're using the word ecosystem when we can think about this word ecosystem in terms of its original intent as an ecological system, or we can use it in the everyday sense that seems to be very common these days. We've got innovation ecosystems, and every other form of ecosystem. Or we can actually use it in a powerful metaphorical way, which I've very rarely ever encountered. So back to this issue of meaning and the language that we're actually using. Because, say, I got the word systems thinking, with problems because of the hard-soft distinction. The word ecosystem for me is a very problematic word. And I'm just interested in how do you handle all this, given the concepts that you actually raised, particularly this notion of the hermeneutic enabler that Angela drew upon. Sorry if I'm labored on a bit.
Thank you, Stephen. Luis?
Yes, I like that very, very much, and the sensitivity for it. Ecosystems, ecology has a tradition in itself, is a story in itself, is an evolution in the term in itself. And I plead guilty in that sense that I use ecology especially to flag the coexistence of whatever. And with the coexistence comes a bigger picture and the relational quality that we encounter within that bigger picture that may identify itself in the one or the other way, that recognizes and realizes itself as an ecology through the recognition and realization of its relations, of its relationality, of its interconnectedness and interdependence. And for a long time, we sort of saw a lot of focus with system cybernetics at focusing on entities like organizations, which are fairly easy to relate to as their own closure. But as soon as you move further and say, okay, we're looking at more organizations at the same time, and this is where we move over to the field or whatever we'd like to call it, a field in itself and for itself, or an ecosystem in itself and for itself. And lately, especially in the research that I've been doing in Morocco in the last 7 years, the term social ecosystem proved to be more facilitating in the conversations that we had in the different contexts of the education system, in the communities, because they are permanently negotiating their boundaries and their connectivity. So if you look at a school, is a school something that lands in a community, or is it interwoven with the community? What constitutes the school as a school in contrast to the community? And what is the community? Does it entail the school or not? Are only the teachers and the children or the students part of the school, or also the parents? And you get into all kinds of questions that are gently embraced by the term social ecosystem. And yes, we should be vigilant and keep a keep an eye on, well, the further development of the term and how it is understood. And we are very much back to the success paradox, aren't we? That we see that language is used without being connected to the theory and the experience it grew from. And that accounts for both sides, for the academic realm as much as for the practice and people being immersed in whatever kind of social practice and the experiences that come with it. I land here. And,
Thank you, Luis and Stephen. We have 4 people waiting to engage with you. So let's start with the Czeslaw.
Okay, good. So thanks, Luis, for as always inspiring presentation. I try to, as a talkative person, I try to be very brief. So first of all, when somebody asked me what I'm doing, are we a specialist in complexity? No, because there are so many definitions of complexity. I'm a specialist in the situations when people use the term complexity, beginning from mathematical models and ending with Luhmann, Rosen, etc., etc. Why as I've said, well, your presentation is very inspiring, but I have the following remarks. First of all, right now I'm moving into that direction that I want to study complexity from such a perspective, such broadly understood complexity, that if we say that this is complex, it means that we are ignorant. We don't know something. So it's a kind of confession of ignorance. So that's why in that Atlas of Complexity published by Edward Elgar, the authors go to psychology, to psychoanalysis. So it's a natural tendency that we study complexity also from the perspective of psychology, of cognition, etc. So this is my first point. My second point is more controversial. It seems to me, and not times it seems to me, it's certain that such a broad language is becoming, not too productive. Why? Because when you go methodology, epistemology, etc., such a language could be easily paradoxized, either with tautologies or what is now my main topic of interest, the infinite regress. Because it is becoming very important in relations, for instance, with artificial intelligence, etc. We have to go deeply. How does the infinite regress occur, and what are the consequences? So it's my second point in this case, that this language is just too broad. So how could be the solution? My third point is the levels of hermeneutics. Looking from a perspective of the author, applying this hermeneutics, that which is the level, only text in the context, and in that, etc. So there could be 3, 4 levels of hermeneutics. So my main appeal is to put such a discussion in a more precise language. I don't claim that everything should be extremely precise, but as I've said, it's easy to paradoxize such presentation using just the problems of and consequences of infinite regress. Thank you.
thank you so very much, Czeslaw. I like all 3 points, starting from the first one with the confession of ignorance, and I found that so Socratic. We know that we do not know, and I like to draw a distinction between knowing.
Sorry, Luis, I interrupt you. Now my problem is not that we don't know what we don't know. We don't know what is knowledge, and I stop.
And I'm very much embarking on that. And you, thank you so very much. I draw a distinction between knowing and understanding, and seeing in the tradition that comes with knowing and knowledge, which is very much in the scientific tradition, evidence-based and related to a different way of approaching the world, while the term understanding is much broader, much wider, and entails not only those things that I can measure and explain, but also the sentiments, the feelings, that what makes our apparatus of relating with the world whole. And I saw it in the chat to relate to wholeness as an element of health, and to remain there and to understand, for that matter, invite all those elements that facilitate our contact with ourselves, with the living world, and with each other. So knowing is something that we learned to be rather narrow because we exclude so very much. Second, the broad language. And if we look at the political world, political spin, language matters, don't think of a pink elephant, and how language evokes sentiment, how it evokes understanding is very, very sensitive. And in the broad language, or the broad language is cultivated at that very moment where a specific experience recognizes itself in the language and finds the words to express itself. And this is where a sensitivity for the language is very, very facilitating to grow an understanding of whatever kind of social practice, and also allows us to venture the twilight, to use Heidegger's term here, as the language is the house of being, and the way we are with the language as a reflection, as an expression of our experiences, shapes the world and grows our world. And last but not least, the hermeneutics. This is where we bend back to the complexity. In April, I was invited to speak at the World Conference for Complex Systems in Benguir, which is a mining city halfway between Casablanca and Marrakesh, where the University Mohammed VI Polytechnique built a large campus. And being immersed in complexity science there, I found it interesting how they process and the focus on the question, how do we read the noise? To acknowledge that whatever we may relate to in terms of world may appear to ourselves as noise, which we want to read, which we want to understand. This is where it bends back to the hermeneutics. And I found it very, very delightful to see how that conference was stretching from all kinds of methods, methodologies, instruments, techniques to read the noise, to the very other side of the spectrum, to question our understanding of understanding. And this is where, for me, the hermeneutics re-enter also into the field of complexity. I leave it here. And oh gosh, another 4. John.
We have only 20 minutes, so we need to give them the opportunity to talk. So John Lee.
Thank you. So Louis, I only have 5 things to say, and now I've cut it down to 3. So I'll start with where you are. We went over an hour and 2 minutes before somebody mentioned AI. When AI is true, it's marvelous. When AI is false, it's stupid. Nobody can tell the difference. That is the emergent problem everywhere in society at every level today. That is the biggest social issue crisis in the world, even more than the war in Iran or whatever, Trump or whatever, because it complicates what people think is the truth. So, what you said in the last 5 minutes is how system science, or 2 minutes, is how system science is providing the leadership in having the discussion about what does truth mean now that we don't know what we know what we know. So we're in this whole new world where science, let alone healthcare, is no longer reliable. It's no longer verifiable. We're in a new world where we have to set up a whole new set of rules about what science means. And that's what you talked about in the last 2 minutes, and my head was blowing up because I wanted to talk about two other things. So, Stephen, this is the invention of the word social ecology. This book is 1982. This man, Murray Bookchin, is the only Marxist I've ever heard of who is a post-Marxist ecologist. He is the social ecologist. You need to study this book. So the reality is that we all now live in the world of ecology, and we have for 100 years since the term ecology was invented, and it's a useful term. And now I'm at my main point. Louis, could you put up the next to last slide, the one that says TAM can process?
I can give it a try.
This so my main theme ever since I finally figured out BSM in 2010 when Elena turned me on to holistic management and Bill Christopher, what I realized is everybody lives in a 1-2-3 world or a 3-2-1 world if you're the boss. And nobody realizes there is a 3-4-5. So as soon as you start talking about four, people go, "Oh my God, what are you talking about? You're not talking about reality." And you go, "Wait a minute, there are ways that you can change what three is now." So my analysis is the first three lines: experience-based, relationship-oriented, co-created, co-facilitated process of inquiry, learning, and understanding is three. Embedded in epistemologic humility, trusting our human potential, trusting our humanity is four. And realizing the essentiality and existentiality of love is five. Thank you.
I love that so very much.
No,
Uh, and a quick one, there, leaning to the phenomenology is a sense of reality that embarks on real is whatever informs and forms our experiences. That is certainly what we can experience in the material world, but also our thoughts, our imagination are informing our experiences. And allow to inhabit something that is much, much broader than just the material world.
Thank you, Luis. And thank you, John. Very interesting conversation.
I just want to add one more thing. Yesterday, I read the Pope's ecumenical on AI, and I think it's a summary of your talk.
I feel so holy now.
Okay, thank you, John.
Quickly say thank you to Louis. I don't know how to put my hand up to ask a question. I want just to say to Louis, it's been great to see him again after many years, and it's been a wonderful talk. And the missing two laws of observation and action, I will quote, are
there is always error, and there is always the unexpected. Thank you, Louis.
And thank you,
very
Werner,
much.
for your wonderful comments in the chat. Absolutely beautiful. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Thank you. Elena.
Hi, Louis. Thanks for a great presentation. As you were speaking about the limits of language, I was wondering about what you thought of the potential for art and science collaboration, like Gordon Pask and Bill Seaman and Herbert Brun were doing, to kind of extend the perception and the understanding where maybe the words weren't there yet. And I think that that's especially relevant to AI because it's trained on words.
Absolutely. And my head is full. You prompted something there. The first is going back to Luhmann and saying, well, what is the societal function of art is to reintroduce contingency in the ways we observe and describe ourselves. So reintroducing contingency, widening the perspective, widening the gaze of what we recognize, what we realize, well, it's just broadening the world. So that is the first thing that came to my mind. The second is poetry.
Mm-hmm.
And when it comes down to the arts and systems, it is so much for me. It's all revolves around poetry for the very very many aspects of it. The first aspect is of course finding a new language. There's always an undiscovered language in the language that we already speak, and poetry can access that, can give us new words, new phrases, new ways to dance with the language and to express feelings. I have a lot of friends in Nepal, for that matter, and when you are in the country, and I've been working there a lot, you have a feeling people are either happy or angry, and we had a discussion about that, and my Nepali friend said, yes, and there are no words to express what's in between. So in their being, in the being in the world, the language does not facilitate to go into different degrees of sentiment, of feeling in between being happy or angry. And that is where poetry comes in and enriches our world by giving us a possibility to express the different experiences, the different feelings that we have. And then another two, and then I try to be quick on those. Poetry has the ability to evoke the very experience or the very feeling that it is talking about. It transcends that element of aboutness and invites us into the very experience. And this is where a poem may move us deeply. And it is that capacity. And I take poetry now just as one example for the different arts that we can think of. And we can think of music, and we can of painting and theatre and all of that. And last but not least, poetry is in its root going back to the poesis, the becoming is something that reminds us of the capacity of language as such, and we're back to Heidegger, to evoke what we relate to as world. And on all these aspects, Eleanor, I would more than invite, more than emphasize the importance to not only bridge the two, but to really be together in and harvest the possibilities to venture even further in our understanding of the world and ourselves within it, and the possibilities that reside in the present and that want to grow out of it. And the richer our perspective of the world, the richer becomes our future, and the arts have a very, very large stake in that.
Thank you.
I think it's Marcus now.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Louis, for the stimulating presentation. I have a question with respect to two terms you were using that seem to have some importance, and one is tamkeen and the other one quiddity. So tamkeen, well, I have seen a slide now with a lot of attributes, but still it's not quite clear what is the meaning and what's the purpose. Where does it come from and what is it good for? And the second one, quiddity, is also interesting. But I'm also interested, why do you use these terms and not others?
Thank you, Marcus, for a real Marcus question. I love that. The word tamkeen is Arabic, and if we would sort of try to explain it, it describes the potential of the seed finding its favorable ecological niche. That sounds a bit cumbersome. The German word that comes closest to it, and now we have an advantage here, Marcus, is Gedeihlichkeit.
Yeah.
And what I like to refer here to is, well, this is very much what I encountered in Morocco, and they were looking at growing a shared understanding from co-reflected lived experiences in the tamkeen process in the mirror of tamkeen, sort of looking at a growing understanding and always asking, does that hold tamkeen? Is das gedeihlich? Is that a contribution to the conditions for co-flourishing? And that still sounds a bit abstract, or as something that could sounds a bit as a put in or being a choice. But I'd like to imagine just for a moment the situation where you enter a cafe or a restaurant or something, and you go through the door, you open it, you look through the room, there are tables, there are chairs, there are a few people there. And at that moment, you have an intuition what chair is calling you. You have the intuition for the tamkeen of that chair to serve you well for the next hour that you want to spend in that cafe or restaurant or wherever you choose a seat. You have an idea, you have an intuition, and we all have that intuition. And that is the remarkable aspect of tamkeen. And they speak about it as the mirror of tamkeen, to look into the co-reflection of the lived experience and the growing understanding in that mirror, and say that understanding that grows from it, especially the part of what could be, not only what is, but also what could grow from it. And this is, I promised that earlier, where the gardening comes back. In that recognition of the different possibilities, of the different things that may grow out of a specific presence, in the mirror of tamkeen, you have an immediate idea of which of those possibilities you want to water, you want to nourish, you want to hedge. And so that is the story of Tamkeen, and there's much more literature on that, and something that is not trivial, something that informs and forms that process of inquiry, learning, and understanding in a way to move over to the second half of that sentence that is characterizing the Tamkeen process. And the quiddity is something that I encountered in Islamic mysticism, where you probably have know about the Wadat al-Wujud, which is the unity of existence. For system scientists, that is a trivial thing. Well, the existence is a unit. Everything is interconnected and interdependent in the one or the other way. And we encounter that question with Ibn Arabi very prominently, and he calls it, well, the Wadat al-Wujud, the unity of existence. But then in the aftermath, there comes the question, and what's the quality of it? And this is where the word quiddity comes in. So in the Arabic, they distinguish between the quiddity as the whatness and existence of the thatness. Huh. Now we're going really deep in that rabbit hole. But that is the choice of the word quiddity in that context of Tamkeen as one of their resonances or references to their own social practice amongst scientific, philosophical references is that Sufi mysticism and the belief or the sentiment or the insight that what holds existence together, or the whatness of existence, is love. And there you are in a very, very deep level of spiritual realization. And in my research, I chose to be with that growing understanding of the Tamkeen organization, or Tamkeen, as the models of the transformation of the Moroccan education system. But that's another long story, and I leave it here. But yes, quiddity, you're spot on, Marcus, is opening a rabbit hole where you can go very, very, very deep.
Thank you.
Elena, Angela, you're muted, so you seem to.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. I just wanted to ask the final question. From your experience in leading and facilitating the cyber systemic community, how would you respond to this idea of what will be your intuition for a condition of co-flourishing in the cyber systemic community? Just an intuition.
My intuition is that we are on a very, very good path, that it requires courage to venture even further. We come out of a tradition, a very academic tradition of debate and confrontation, and debating my truth against your truth, or whatever. And as you probably noticed in the last 5 years, from one agenda to the other that we publish from the IFSR-EC, it is going more and more into the collaboration and the confluence. I'd like to address one question that we had, leaning into a bit of a debate there. How to define the edges of the playing field. And I very much like the question as a question that looks for closure and identity. However, we landed on the notion of recognizing the edges of the playing field, which takes away the power and the burden of our discourse here and what the IFSR is doing, to not claim any kind of authority, but to invite a larger discourse, a larger dialogue of all of those who feel family resemblance or want to be part of it. And we just today, for me, a remarkable milestone, we accepted as an affiliate member of the IFSR the UNESCO Chair on Complexity, Edgar Morin. So, which is remarkable in the way that kind of lighthouse of complexity sciences thinks it could be at home in the IFSR, and by doing so, adding a new voice into the space. And what I'd like to see in the future, and invite in the future, and dedicate a lot of my engagement is to really grow a shared understanding from the co-reflected lived experiences in that space, and to get real along the question, what is it that we do when we do what we do? And I think I'll end here.
Very nicely, very nice end to your talk. Perfect. Thank you, Luis. It's been absolutely a pleasure to have you with us. Thank you very much.
My
Okay,
pleasure.
and thank you everyone for coming. We have some practitioners webinar coming, and I don't think that we have any more general webinars before the conference, but you are all welcome to the conference in September, to Stafford Centenary Conference in Manchester. So those of you who haven't registered, please have a look at the website. And thank you very much, Louis. Thank you.
Thanks,
That
Louis.
was
Thanks,
outstanding.
Thanks,
Thank
Thank
Angela.
you.
you.
That's amazing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Everybody.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Yeah, Angela, is she